Okay, so a warm welcome everyone. This is the webinar by GreenGage, and I would like to welcome here Dave Corbet here, who is the Director of GreenGage Consulting Limited. Tonight we have prepared the topic of the importance of collaboration and collaborative leadership to achieve public service excellence. So I welcome Dave to share stories and practices of how we can do this well.
Lovely. Thanks very much, Andrea. Thanks for that kind introduction. So, yeah, collaborative leadership for public service excellence. That's a bit of a mouthful, but really what we're talking about is how do we work together to do what we need to do in the public sector, particularly across local government and the NHS, but also other public sector agencies as well, to deliver excellent services for the public. And I wanted to start really just by acknowledging, I mean, I don't really need to teach my grandmother to suck eggs, so to speak, because I'm sure you all know this, but to just acknowledge that we are in one of the most challenging periods ever faced by the local government, the NHS, and other partners, that not only are there increasing demands, particularly on things like adult social care, but also there are financial pressures. You know, budgets aren't exactly increasing, and certainly in the case of local government, they're decreasing. And that's giving rise to a real need to collaboration, a need to kind of join up across different parts of the same organisation, but also between organisation, in order to deliver excellent public services. And then the final step there, I've talked about staff engagement. And the reason that's very important, of course, is because, you know, one of the things I certainly find, and I'm sure this will resonate with you, is that many staff can feel quite demoralised by the pressure that they're under. And there's never been a time when actually we haven't needed more people to be absolutely engaged, to feel that they can give of their all in the public sector so that we can deliver really excellent public services. So there's a whole range of different challenges that we face. And really what we're looking at here is a way of thinking about how do we work together to address some of those challenges. But the other thing I wanted to just say is really setting a little bit of context, is that not only are there these pressures in the public sector, but also we're at a time when the expectations of how we work in organisations is changing. And of course, organisations always change. I mean, if I think about my career, I don't think I've ever been in a time in any organisation I've worked with where there hasn't been change going on. But I'm talking about something a little bit more radical than that. And these three overlapping curves here represent the idea that every so often, the way we think about organisations, what we expect from organisations, how we see what really matters in organisations actually fundamentally changes. And in fact, if we go back in time, many of us, I'm certainly old enough to recognise a time when organisations were what I would call largely a conformance culture, where tradition and rules were what really mattered. And of course, over the last 20, 30 years, the idea that performance is what matters, that we have to measure things, and we have to make sure that we measure the right things and improve those things, has really taken hold. And pretty much all organisations in the public sector now are very performance driven. You know, we decide what's important, we measure it, and we manage it. And that was a great improvement on the way things were before. But actually, it's not quite enough. You know, there's a new way of thinking about organisations that is emerging, which we call the collaborative culture. And of course, this isn't just me saying this. This is something that's being seen not just in the public sector and not just in the UK, but actually worldwide, a different way of thinking about organisations. Because whilst we have a performance culture largely across the public sector, and in fact most of the private sector as well, it's still quite hierarchical. You know, this idea that we find the best people, we promote them, we put them in positions of authority, and then they take decisions. And of course, that's fantastic. It works much better than the older situation where the people in charge were largely the people who just went to the right schools and were the right gender. At least now, you know, things are a little bit more of a meritocracy. But it's still a hierarchy. It still means that there are many people in organisations who have a lot to offer, who can't take decisions, who can't do the things that really matter in order to move things forward. And what's emerging across and it's a bit of a worldwide phenomenon, this, but it's taking hold in the public sector in the UK, is a different way of thinking about organisations where we start to devolve decision-making to as many people as possible across the organisation. And I just want to give one really practical example of this, so just so it sort of makes sense. So, for example, I've been doing a lot of work in the NHS over the last few years, and I was doing some work in a large hospital where there was an issue over delivering medicines to patients within the timescale necessary. It's quite important to get medicines for some conditions, like, say, for example, septicemia, to patients within, say, an hour, because the effectiveness decreases rapidly after that hour. And there was a problem with medicines not being delivered rapidly enough. They were sometimes taking an hour and a half or 2 hours. And there was a very complicated program set up with hundreds of individual actions managed by a thing called the Performance and Quality Board to improve this. And one of the nurses on one of the wards said, actually, it's really simple. The problem is the trolley round takes more than an hour. You know, we go around with our trolley with the medicines on, and by the time we got to the last patient, it's taken more than an hour. So we're always building in failure. So her suggestion was we simply split the trolley round in half. But she couldn't take that decision herself. She couldn't actually make that decision. And so she had to pass it to the ward sister, who passed it to a matron, and the matron passed it to a manager, who passed it to another manager. And it ended up back at Performance and Quality Board, which was populated by, you know, directors of this, that, and the other. And of course, by the time it got to them, they didn't really quite understand the importance of this relatively simple action. And therefore, it didn't happen. And of course, what we mean by collaborative culture is a culture where actually that nurse could actually start to take that decision with some guidance, with some advice. But it's a different way of working where people feel, you know, all the mass of people in an organisation feel they can take decisions, they can contribute. And I think the expectations, particularly amongst these phrases get bandied about millennials and so on, actually their expectation of how they want to be engaged with an organisation is changing quite significantly. So this is a kind of backdrop to something that's happening in organisations in general, beyond the public sector, but is vitally important when we think about how the public sector responds to this need to collaborate more effectively. So I'll move to the next slide. Actually, if you're interested in this sort of stuff, this is maybe a little bit theoretical. This is an excellent book, Reinventing Organisations by Frederic Laloux. And he did a huge survey of different organisations, particularly organisations that are entering this kind of new wave of how organisations work. And there's some fascinating case studies in there about what's possible. Strongly recommend it. It's an excellent book to read. And there's lots of excerpts on the web as well if you want to Google it. So I want to get into now. So, okay, if that's the backdrop, we need to collaborate in order to be able to meet the challenges that we face in the public sector. What's the formula for collaborative working? And what I want to present you is really some really hard-won experience based on 20 years of working with organisations in the public sector, primarily in local government, but also in an NHS and other agencies as well. And really learning from all those extraordinary people that I've met over the years that have wrestled with this challenge. And they've come up with great solutions, and also lots of lessons about what doesn't work as well. So these are really lessons about what do we need to do? How do we need to work together in order to really be able to provide leadership in that context? And the thing I'm going to just start with is what I call the collaborative mindset, which really underpins how do we think about how we work together? And there's 4 aspects to this, which I'm going to go through. I think you can see them there. So I call it everybody thinking, asset focus, outcome focus, and restorative thinking. You might recognize some of the words there. And I'm just going to talk through these because in our experience, these are 4 aspects of the way we work, which inform the way we think, inform the way we interact with people. And also what we've done is develop a set of tools and approaches which embody this way of thinking. But it's really the way of thinking that really matters rather than the tools themselves. So the first one is this, what I've called everybody leadership, which I've kind of already been talking about, this shift from a hierarchical culture where we have a meritocracy where, you know, we identify people on the basis of their capability, and we identify the price the best, and we put them in charge, and then they tell everyone else what to do. And I'm sure you've had lots of experiences of being in a situation where you know what to do, particularly maybe early in your career when a little bit more junior, and you thought, I know what to do, I just can't convince my boss to do it. And it can be devil's only job to actually move forward, almost sometimes in spite of what the organisation does to us. And in fact, I've actually had conversations with chief executives of organisations who are in exactly the same position. They might be the chief executive of their organisation, but they're working within a system where somehow nobody seems to be in a position to actually take a decision and actually get on and do what everyone knows is the sensible thing to do. And this is one of the frustrations of this performance culture. Because of course what we do in a performance culture, we divide things up. We hand them out to people who say, you know, you manage this, I'll manage the next bit. And then we're really surprised when people compete. And the real challenge, if we want to collaborate, is we've got to create a collaborative culture where we behave and think in a different way. So the shift, and you can see on the right-hand side of the image there, is I've represented that as more of a network. But really the way to think about it is there's a challenge, there's a task to be done. And rather than thinking about hierarchies, we think about who actually can do that work. Who is it we need in the room to get that done? And of course, we're talking about task and finish groups there. But actually, in my experience, and I'm sure this will resonate with you, often, you know, we have, I'm sure you go to meetings where you get into the room and nobody in the room is really quite in contact with the problem we're talking about. They might be managing people that are in contact with it, but they're not actually doing it themselves. So what we're talking about here is giving a little bit of power, a little bit of ability to make decisions to the people who actually I really understand the problem and can actually implement it. And also beyond that, making sure that when we collaborate, we're working in such a way that all the different voices can be heard. So there's a kind of sense of inclusivity, a sense of really being able to understand all the different voices. And this is particularly important when we're working across organizations, when often there are quite different interests. I mean, I had an interesting experience recently working with 6 NHS trusts. And in fact, you know, they're trying to collaborate. There's a real commitment to collaborate, but actually it's built into their constitution that there are real conflicts of interest. So it's very important to be able to work in such a way that people really understand the constraints and the limitations of the organizations they're trying to work in. So that's what we mean by everybody leadership. And in the programs we've run, we've developed a set of tools that help people embody this form of working. And in fact, here's an example. So this was actually a meeting we ran for a GP's network in Cumbria, and you can see people hard at work. And actually, these are people making decisions as they're working. So they're actually a group of GPs. They're looking at the challenges they have as GP practices. Some of these are GPs, some of them are actually nurse practitioners, some of them are practice managers, but they're identifying problems and working on them live. And the big sheet of paper you can see there, which I'll talk about a little bit more, is one of the tools we developed. We call it the collaboration canvas, and it helps people work in this kind of everybody way. It gives everyone a voice, and it brings that conversation down to a single focal point that everyone can work on together. Very simple, but actually extremely powerful. The second aspect of this collaborative mindset is what we call asset-focused leadership, or sometimes talk about asset-based thinking. And it's a very simple idea, and in fact it's extremely powerful. Again, right? You see organizations that are working this way, and it's really about, do we focus on what we can do, or do we focus on what we can't do? Do we focus on what we have, or do we focus on what we don't have? And one of the things that you'd find is, if you tune into this, when I go to lots of meetings where I might spend the first part of the meeting when I'm getting to know a new client, just listening, seeing what it is they pay attention to. And I notice all the time that people will meet, and what they focus on is entirely what's wrong, what's missing, what doesn't work, what they don't like. And whilst there's a relevance to that, it's important we identify the challenges and problems we have. It's actually very demoralizing, and it doesn't move things forward. It doesn't actually get anything done. And there's a fundamental shift to a way of thinking that says, what is it that's actually working that we can do more of? And there's a phrase we use about magnify what's best and then focus on what's next. In other words, think about what is it that's already working, because there will be many, many things that are working really well. And something kind of miraculous happens when we do that, that actually gives people a lot of energy. And we actually find a lot of the things that we want in the future are already with us. They're just not, we need to grow them a little bit more. So it's a really important aspect of the collaborative mindset is being able to shift the conversation into this asset-based approach. If you want a great example of this, by the way, go and talk to people at Wigan Council. They're really brilliant at this, actually, and they've really got this implanted in the way they work. It's a pleasure to see the impact that it has. And again, if you want to read about this, I love the book of this cover. It's not the wrong way around. I didn't photograph it in a mirror. It's called Change the Way You See Everything. And of course, he's presenting a model that looks the wrong way around. Because what it's saying, we look at everything in the wrong way around. We look at the problems rather than the opportunities. And whilst that might sound a little bit soft and fluffy, it's actually very hard-edged. It demands of us a little bit of courage to actually focus on what works, and it pays dividends. So the third aspect of the collaborative mindset is what we call outcome-focused leadership. I think this actually is beginning to be relatively well understood. This idea that when we work together as a group of people, yes, we've got to be inclusive, that's the everybody leadership. Yes, we've got to be positive, that's the asset-based thinking. But actually, we have got to have a hard edge. We have actually got to make a difference. Otherwise, what is the point of meeting? We don't want talking shops. I mean, talking is very important, but it's got to lead somewhere. So actually, being able to focus on what's the difference we're trying to make? What's this for? So what? We're having this conversation. What difference is actually going to make is really important. And you'll see, actually, we put a little arrow there saying start here. Our experience is it makes a difference where we start. When we start with the end in mind, when we start with the result we want to create, actually, it energizes us. It gives us an opportunity to visualize how do we want things to be. And it actually catapults us out of some of the negativity that we can get into. And I don't want to overplay that, but I certainly find when I go to work with teams, I'm really quite shocked sometimes how difficult it can be for teams to get out of the kind of the long grass of just focusing on what's wrong. So this diagram we've got here is actually a model that we developed called the three R's. Very simple model. It simply divides it's a problem-solving tool, an improvement tool. And it says, actually, anything we want to improve, there's three conversations we need to have. We need to have all three conversations. We need to understand what's the result we're trying to create, what's the outcome we're trying to create. We need to understand our reality. And part of that is what's wrong. Part of it is what's working, actually. And then finally, we need to decide what are we going to do that's going to get us from where we are to where we want to be. And actually, in any successful conversation, we're going to have all three of those conversations. Often what happens in groups of people working together, one of those conversations goes missing, or one of the conversations completely dominates, and people wonder why they can't move forward. Again, I'll give you a book recommendation. I make no apologies. This is a book that I wrote called From Know-How to Do-How, and it focuses pretty much entirely on this model of the three R's, but also another model about how we change our behaviour so we can get out some of the patterns of habitual behaviour that get in the way. And then finally, the fourth aspect of the collaborative mindset is what we call restorative leadership. And of course, we borrowed that word from restorative justice. This idea that when we're working in groups of people, we need to create a climate which is both highly supportive. In other words, we support each other. We look for how we can help each other and build on each other's ideas. But it also needs to be highly challenging. We need to create a situation where we can challenge each other and we can say, actually, no, I don't agree with that. And it to be okay that we don't agree with that as well. So, that's the image there of the helping hand, helping each other up. But also it's making sure that we are challenging each other and we're able to test ideas robustly. And again, we've developed a set of tools that helps us do that in a really, really systematic way. And I thought it was useful to show this idea that, when we create a culture, a climate, when we're working with a group of people, which is both high challenge and high support, then we work with people rather than doing things to people or doing things for people. So that's a very quick run through of this collaborative mindset that we're trying to create. And of course, what we've done, we've been working with this for 20 years with in the public sector, and actually learn a tremendous amount from our clients. I say every time I meet my clients, I learn new things. So what we've got here is a program that we pulled together called Work Together, Get Results, which encapsulates a lot of these ideas. And we've built some very simple tools that are easy to use. And again, I've got this picture here that you can see with the chap who is a GP. And he's working on the collaboration canvas, which is one of the key tools that we use with people. That tool embodies the 3 R's, the outcome focused thinking, but it also encourages people to work inclusively. That's everybody thinking, and it encourages people to use asset-based thinking as well. I'll just say a little bit more about the Work Together Get Results program, because I think it's kind of interesting, the approach that we get very good feedback, which is, although we could call it a training program, it's actually a practice program. In other words, it's about getting people working together on real problems in order to learn how to work together with people on real problems. So we don't actually teach people very much. We introduce a few ideas, and then we get people working on real problems using the collaboration canvas. So what they're doing is working on problems that are of immediate application to their day job. They're not coming to something which is taking up time, which they could be spending, in very pressurized jobs, but actually they're carving out quality thinking time in order to work on the problems they need to solve as part of their day job. And of course, they're learning by doing. They're learning how to collaborate by collaborating, and they're learning from each other. I mean, one of the principles we build in is, part of learning to collaborate is actually learning that we all learn together. We learn how to do this together. And in fact, one of the real joys of this program is the way it builds networks of people, which then find it much easier to collaborate because they've built up that common language. And then, of course, the thing that I've talked about already with building that collaborative mindset. So the tools matter, but actually it's the way of thinking that really matters. Those realizations that nobody's as capable as everybody. So here we are. So what we do is we spend 75% of our time working on practical problem solving and improvement, and a little bit of time in exploring the collaborative mindset. So for example, we might introduce this idea. So I just mentioned nobody's as capable as everybody. That's what we call the everybody mindset. And it's a simple idea. It's a very simple idea. And it's something that's kind of obvious when we think about it, but actually how often do we actually behave as if that's true? In most organizations I work with, the starting point is actually that some people are more capable than others, and those people should make the decisions. And actually there's an element of truth to that. There's an element of truth that some people are more capable than others. We can measure that. But it's also true that nobody is as capable as everybody. And when we create a situation where everyone can be included, we come up with better solutions. So what we do is spend a little bit of time exploring that, exploring the reality of that in people's work lives, and then we apply it to actual some real problem solving. So people are learning that these aren't actually ideas, they're real insights that they can apply in their work. And then I've already mentioned the collaboration canvas, which is really the heart of the program. It's a very simple tool, but it helps people focus their conversation around a single outcome-focused conversation. And here we are. Here's the collaboration canvas. You can see it's very simple. It's actually deceptively simple. It's one of these tools which we put it in front of people, and instinctively they have a sense that they can have a conversation. It pulls people into a conversation where they listen to each other. And actually, with a little bit of training, people can learn how to have a very productive conversation using this tool and come out with plans that really stick, where people come up with, for example, a collective sense of commitment to the outcome they're creating. And then one other thing to say about the Work Together Get Results program is the way it's designed is actually designed to build self-sustaining capacity, because we're very aware that in the public sector, funds aren't all that readily available. It's difficult to find money to spend on external training and consultants. So we've actually designed the program so that effectively, when we train people how to use the collaboration canvas and the other tools, it's very easy for them to then cascade that to their colleagues. So it becomes something which can be replicated throughout the organization. And it has a remarkable impact. I mean, this is a quote from a divisional director. So the divisional director is basically the head of one of the divisions of the hospital. So that in this case, it was the head of children's and midwifery. It makes what seems impossible practical and achievable. I was really very proud when I read that. Actually, I thought that's really felt like I felt like my work had been well done, and it was really satisfying to read that. And of course, we get lots of other good feedback. But just to summarise what the Work Together Get Results program delivers. So it develops a consistent approach to improvement, allows people to work together on a consistent approach to improvement. It delivers practical changes and improvements as part of actually doing the program. And it develops a network of colleagues with high levels of trust. So one of the ways this is being used by clients we work with is actually people who need to collaborate are going through the program together and finding that by going through the program, they're developing that network, that sense of trust, that common language that allows them to deal with the difficulties that inevitably come up. And of course, in doing that, it builds that capacity to facilitate collaborative working. And then finally, it develops the mindset that supports collaborative working, which people can take back into the organisation. So it becomes like a seed that's planted rather than something which it has to be kind of repeated each time. There's a few examples of organisations we've worked with, and I could give you examples of how that has worked. But I just want to mention at the end here a number of ways that you can get involved now. So the first one is you could claim your free copy of the collaboration canvas. So if you email me at that email address, I will send you a copy of the collaboration canvas. It is helpful to have a little bit of training on the collaboration canvas, but actually you'll find just simply using it, it's fairly self-explanatory. It's numbered, so it even tells you where to start. And we've certainly used it with colleagues where we've simply placed the canvas on tables at large events, for example, and people have used it very easily without any instruction. But if you did want more detail, when you can book us for a free briefing for senior decision makers on the creating the collaborative organisation. One of the things that we find interesting is this sense that organisations are changing, that the demands on the way that we make on the way organisations work is actually probably better understood by people further down into the organisations that really get how frustrating it can be to not be able to make decisions, to be faced with impenetrable barriers to doing the sensible thing. Whereas I think sometimes people at a more senior level don't always quite understand how frustrating it can be further down into the organisation. So actually a briefing for senior decision makers can be very helpful in helping them understand some of the ways that other organisations are changing and making a real difference. And we give lots of examples in the briefing. And then finally, it is helpful to have some instruction on the collaboration canvas. So what we've done is given a special discounted price for the half-day workshop introduction to the collaboration canvas for people viewing this webinar over the next couple of days. So that's something that you might want to consider and take up. So I'll just finish. Of course, the final thing is you could always give us a call, arrange a meeting to discuss in more detail. We're very happy to come along and talk about whatever your needs are. But the final thing is just to ask, are there any questions before we close the webinar?
I would like to raise a question, Dave.
Thank you,
mentioned earlier that in the hierarchical approach, we tend to divide up the objectives and then we tend to solve problems with managers in the room who are quite distant from the actual day-to-day operations of a service or a process.
Yeah.
How can the networked approach turn this around? And how do we actually make sure, do we still from the top down create that network and decide who gets involved in the problems?
Yeah.
How do we organize in the public services?
Yeah. So there's quite a number of different layers to how I could answer that. So I'll just mention a couple of things. So the first thing is there's a basic principle that we call organize the work, not the people. So what we mean by that, if you think about how most organizations are organized, we organize people. So we decide, you're the manager of this service. So there you are on the organization chart, and these are the people that work for you. And maybe some of those are team leaders and people work for them, and you have your boss and there's a line from you to that boss. And then we're really surprised when it's very difficult to get anything done because we have meetings and maybe we have a manager's meeting, but you know, you're sat there and thinking, well, I don't know anything about this, but because I have somebody who actually does this for me and they know all about it, but they're not sat in the room. So that's what we call managing the people, not the work. And that's actually the most common way of organising things in organisations. But actually, there's a completely different way, which says, rather than organising the people, what we do is we think about what's the job that needs doing and who can actually do it, who's in touch with this, who understands what the problem is, who actually can do the work. And let's get those people in the room and let them actually figure out what needs doing and implement it. And in fact, some organisations have taken the approach. There's one local authority we work with that actually went quite a long way with this. They said, you know, we've got all these people working for us. They've all got job titles. And the chief executive said, every time I want anything done, we don't seem to have any people to do it. And it came to a head, actually. They were trying to organise a festival for the town. And nobody seemed to be available. She said, we've got thousands of people. How come we haven't got any people? And she actually decided, said, I want to get rid of job titles. I want to get rid of this idea that I am the manager of this service, or I'm the assistant manager in this other service. I just want people who can do. I want to know what skills they've got, what strengths they've got, and then when there's a job needs to do, we'll figure out who's got the right skills, who's got the right strengths, who's got some knowledge, and we'll put them in a room and we'll get the job done. And in fact, it's freed up so much capacity in the organisation, because of course, what happens if you organise people rather than the work? People think, I'm in legal services, so I do legal services, and the organisation might not need quite so much priority on legal services as, say, for example, organising a completely different way of delivering services to older people. So actually organising the work rather than the people allows you to move people to where the work needs doing. And our experience is actually it frees up loads of capacity, but actually people love it as well. So that's one answer. The second answer, because of course, one of the things that often happens when we talk about this is the managers go, oh, I don't like the idea of this. People are going to make decisions, and I'm the manager, I make decisions. And in fact, it's quite interesting. If you look up the word manager in the dictionary, it actually, to manage, it says to control. And of course, that's the shift in expectation that we're handling here. You know, particularly amongst younger people, they don't want to be controlled, actually. You know, most of the people that are going into the workplace these days have degrees. You know, they can think for themselves. And the way we manage things, if you think about it, was really designed at the end of the Victorian age in order to manage people who were coming out of the fields, who were largely illiterate and literally needed somebody to tell them what to do. Well, we don't need that anymore. The world's changed. You know, we've got a different workforce. So one of the things that works really well, if people are worried that people, you know, the workforce is going to be taking decisions and who kind of oversees that, is what we call the advice frame. It's a very simple method of making sure that people are making decisions, but there's a sense of oversight. And it works very simply. What you do is, the reason it's called an advice frame is you draw a frame. You know, you literally have a frame that says, within this frame, you can take decisions, and outside the frame, you can't. So in fact, the nurses I mentioned, we did this with them, and we asked them. We also asked their bosses as well, what should the frame be? And they said, well, we don't want to take decisions about money. You know, we don't think that's our job. We don't want to take decisions about changing anything to do with patient safety, because we think that's laid down actually in nursing practice nationally. And there were a number of other things that they felt were outside their remit. But we would like to be able to take decisions about things that immediately affect patients. So one of the examples they gave, in fact, was they had a situation where patients were being invited to appointments with a 10-minute gap between appointments. But the actual appointments took 15 minutes. So, of course, by the end of the first appointment of the day, the schedule was already running 5 minutes late. And by the end of the day, it was running over an hour late. And they said, we'd like to be able to change that, actually. It makes a real difference. So that's, and that was great. That was, you know, it was allowing them to actually manage the work in a way that worked for the workforce, but also worked for the patients, and it improved patient quality and safety. But the second part of this is called an advice frame, and the word advice is in there because it says, actually, no, you don't. Nobody should be taking a decision entirely on their own, because we all have blind spots. We all have brainstorms. You know, we do crazy things. So the second part of it is, who do you need to ask advice from when you want to make a decision? And in the case of the nurses, they said, well, actually, that particular decision, they said, we want to ask the advice of the doctors. So the consultants that the patients are seeing, let's ask their advice. It's their list, it's their patient. And they also said, in general, they felt they should ask the advice of one of the senior matrons, not because they're more senior, but actually because the matron often has a bigger picture, a bigger view of what's going on, and might spot some connection or some reason why they were making a bad decision that they, from their kind of narrower point of view, might not spot. So I could talk about this for hours, but there's a couple of thoughts. Yeah, I hope that helps. Yeah.
It was super useful. It seems to me, Dave, that there are a number of tools that didn't fit in the time frame of this webinar. Yeah, I think the key message is the mindset, the collaborative mindset, and the 4 different types and styles of leadership that we can practically imagine and try to embrace. And then my last question is, where can people find more information on the tools and practices apart from the collaboration canvas?
Okay, so probably the best thing, there's some information on our website, so www.greengageconsulting.co.uk. But actually, the briefing that we give, there's a short version of that. There's also a longer version of that we do on the collaborative organisation, a kind of half-day session, which actually goes through a whole range. We've got about probably 40 different tools and practices that we've largely gathered from observing organisations that are doing this well, and then also by contacting us and talking to us, because there's almost such a range that we kind of need to really dig into. Where's the organisation? What does the organisation trying to achieve, to talk about the tools that are most relevant? Otherwise, we'll swamp people, I think, if we're not careful. Yeah. Okay.
Thank you very much. So for the webinar viewers, this webinar will be available online, and thank you very much for the lovely presentation, Dave.
Thanks very much, Andrea. Thank you.